Next is Reuben Fenton. He was born in what's now the town of Carroll, July 4th, 1819, so he was about 9 years younger than Alonzo Kent. Reuben was the youngest of 5 sons of George Washington and Elsie Owen Fenton. He attended the local schools, spent at least 1 semester at Fredonia Academy, and I've read different amounts of time at a school in Ohio. And you may wonder why Ohio. It was his relatives that ran that school. When Roswell Fenton, who was Reuben's grandfather, decided to move from New Hampshire to the west, he went to Ohio on the river near Cincinnati. And his family was to join him there. But when the family arrived, Roswell was dead, and one story claims he was murdered. I have not gone looking for the information on that story, but that's on my someday list. The family stayed. One of the sisters married into the Carey family, and it was the Carey family that started the Carey Academy at College Hill, which is now part of Cincinnati. George Washington Fenton, who was Reuben's father, was one of the sons in that family who went off to seek his fortune elsewhere, coming up the Ohio, the Allegheny River, to Warren and into New York State, where he married Elsie Owen, and they settled in what is now the town of Carroll. Reuben was married twice. His first wife was Jane Frew of the Frews of Frewsburg. She died in childbirth when their first daughter was born in 1842. Jane Frew Fenton, the daughter, was raised by her maternal grandparents but continued close ties with her father. 2 years later, he married Elizabeth Scudder. They had 2 daughters, Josephine and Jeanette, and 1 son, Reuben Earl. Although Reuben Fenton had studied law, it was said that his health was poor, so he had to quit. He took over his father's failing business, a store. He and his brother turned it around, and Reuben was also involved in the lumbering business, and I always wondered how his health was so poor that he couldn't read law, but he could run a store and be part of the lumbering business, including the stories about him going with the rafts of lumber down the river. I have never seen that explained anyplace, but that's some more research to be done. Because he was involved in the lumber business, that may be one way he met Alonzo Kent, since Alonzo had added lumbering to his dry goods store. Reuben's political career is something that is very interesting for that time period. And at the Fenton, we have the biographical volume of the history of the Republican Party. This is what it says about Reuben Fenton. In respect both to his private character and his public career, he was unquestionably one of the most noble and ideal among the great public men of the state of New York. Such was the confidence which his character and abilities had inspired in his birthplace, that as soon as he reached his majority, he was elected supervisor of his town and served in this position 7 terms, during 3 of which he was chairman of the County Board of Supervisors. So if you think back, that was quite something for somebody in their 20s to be reelected many times as the town supervisor. Subsequently, he was elected to Congress as a Democrat, but immediately became prominent by taking an independent stand against the encroachments of the slave power. He had scarcely taken his seat in the House of Representatives when Stephen A. Douglas introduced the bill repealing the Missouri Compromise. Congressman Fenton instantly raised his voice in vigorous protest. It is a remarkable fact that this, his first utterance in Congress, should be directed against the aggression of the slave power, and that this maiden effort should be the first protest against the proposed violation of the Compact of 1820, which was heard in the House of Representatives. Still more significant, in illustration of the character of the young statesman, was the fact that this stand was directly contrary to the policy of his own political party, and that this party was in power nationally, able to distribute favors or to wield its influence against the rebellious in his own ranks. His maiden speech was for the inviolable preservation of the boundaries so solemnly set by a former generation to the encroachments of slavery. That day, he was one of the leaders in the formation and afterward in the conduct of the Republican Party. This goes on to say he was a member of Congress for 5 consecutive terms for a period of 10 years, from 54 to 64, and I believe that's incorrect. He was elected in 52, served for 1 term, was defeated in re-election, and then went back for 4 terms, ending in 1864 when he was elected governor of the state of New York. He stood shoulder to shoulder with William H. Seward in the organization and successful direction of the Republican Party of this state, New York. He came to be preeminently recognized as the soldier's friend. The bill to facilitate the granting of furloughs and discharges to disabled soldiers, the bill to facilitate the payment of bounties and arrears of pay due wounded and deceased soldiers, and bills granting pensions and those making the applications for them easy and inexpensive were among the results of his patriotic and thoughtful interest. In 1864, the main issue thus being approval or disapproval of the national administration, Lincoln himself being, of course, a candidate for his 2nd term in the presidency. The wisdom of the choice was speedily apparent. Mr. Fenton's unequaled abilities as an organizer were felt in every school district in the Commonwealth, and when the returns showed the state carried for Lincoln, and Fenton leading by some thousands the presidential vote, the new governor became a figure of national importance. On the 11th of November in 1864, in the middle of the front page, there was a small headline that said, "The governor-elect." It went on to say, "There is no doubt of the election of our townsman, Reuben E. Fenton, to succeed Seymour. His vote is considerably larger than the Lincoln electors." So Jamestown is to furnish a governor to the state the next 2 years. There is a much higher and more patriotic ground of exaltation in this matter than the gratification of local pride. Our victory would have been incomplete, our rejoicing overshadowed, if the result had been otherwise. Let us not try any more Seymour experiments. Now is New York State indeed redeemed and regenerated. The devils are cast out, and on January 1st, the Empire State will stand up, clothed and in her right mind. I have found nothing specific that Alonzo and Reuben were political allies, but I certainly can assume that they were. Other people in Alonzo's family were considered Republican later on. There is an important happening here in Jamestown and with Chautauqua Institution when Grant came to Chautauqua, and he had lunch here at Alonzo Kent's home instead of with the ex-governor. And if you go back in the history of the Republican Party, you'll find that Fenton and part of the Republican Party supported Horace Greeley, another person with Chautauqua County connections, in his presidential bid against Grant in 1872. So you can probably see why there was a little bit of antagonism there. And also there have been stories that Mrs. Fenton did not want President Grant at her home because of her temperance views and because of the reputation that Grant was given.